The bomb arrived as notification, not surprise. Enemy fleets broadcast their warning in advance, confident the message alone would break us. They called it a corrective strike, a lesson written in fire. The target was a hab world with no defenses worth naming. Hospitals were hit first, then power, then atmosphere processors. They wanted screams, not resistance. And they streamed the devastation to the entire galaxy. Millions died in minutes. The sky turned the color of a dying star as debris rained through collapsing shields. Emergency channels were jammed with static and laughter from foreign commentators. Alien analysts debated yield and efficiency while families suffocated in sealed transit tubes. The attack was framed as mercy compared to occupation. Even then, the bombers mocked our slow evacuation and called our losses educational. Across the spiral, no one expected retaliation. Humanity had been catalogued as reactive, emotional, loud. Our fleets were mapped, our ranges measured, our industry judged insufficient for sustained war. The strike was chosen precisely for its visibility. It was meant to teach restraint to a species that dared build beyond its assigned limits. Surrender was assumed. Silence followed instead, a silence that spread like a. Earth went dark to the public feed. Trade traffic vanished from open channels. Civilian comms dropped to emergency bands only. What the galaxy called shock was, for us, conversion. Civilian factories locked into military tolerances. Old stockpiles were cracked and re-ranked. Dormant shipyards powered up beneath oceans and ice. No speeches were made. No threats were issued. Orders moved through buried networks with mechanical calm. The enemy waited for protests, for fear, for bargaining. None came. Weeks passed without a response. Reconstruction crews worked in silence beneath wrecked skies. Survivors were evacuated without broadcast, without spectacle. Memorials were postponed. Records were sealed. What little leaked was mistaken for collapse and retreat. Alien strategists congratulated themselves on decisive action. They mistook quiet for submission and patience for paralysis, unaware that debt. Only one thing escaped the blackout. A tight transmission slipped through deep space relays long thought unusable. No origin tag. No flag. Just raw data encoded in obsolete human cipher. To most receivers it was meaningless noise. To a handful of listening posts it was a declaration that preparations were complete. The message contained timing, vectors, and a single contemptuous annotation appended at the end for. At the bombers' home ports, victory toasts were already being poured. Command logs recorded the action as resolved. Training rotations resumed. War planners archived the human file under minor species pacified. No one noticed the missing echoes in subspace, the way certain routes grew empty without explanation. No one questioned why the debris fields from the strike refused to cool at expected rates, as if, on the ruined world, the fires kept burning because there was nothing left to extinguish them. Automated drones combed through rubble without broadcasting their finds. Bodies were not counted aloud. Names were not released. The dead were logged in closed systems and forwarded to families in private packets. There was no public grief. There was only work, relentless and methodical, driven by an outrage that. The Empire issued a final communiqué days later, offering regulated surrender terms as if generosity were on display. They promised protection in exchange for compliance, governance in exchange for silence. The message went unanswered. Interpreters debated meaning where there was none. Analysts mistook absence for confusion. In truth, every human ear that heard it recognized it as a timestamp. The moment the offer was sent. Far beyond the reach of public censors, mass shifted in ways no treaty allowed to exist. Gravity wells flexed under careful stress. Dark launch corridors opened and closed between instants. Power signatures bloomed and vanished like thoughts. The galaxy slept believing the lesson was over. It had only witnessed the greeting. What followed would not be a response shaped by anger, but by accounting and. The galaxy waited for the human scream that never came, for frantic codes and panic diplomacy, for the predictable choreography of a wounded minor power collapsing under pressure. Instead, the trade lanes that usually glittered with human freighters went empty in a single rotation. Insurance markets froze. Merchant guilds protested. No emergency appeals followed. What reached public space was nothing at all. Alien analysts mistook the silence for disintegration. They published charts showing projected food shortages, energy rationing, political fracture. Commentators framed humanity as a civilization folding inward under trauma. The empire that had launched the strike took public credit for restoring regional order and shifted its fleets toward other borders. In their calculus, the problem had solved itself. On human worlds, the blackout held without ceremony. Civilian networks collapsed into encrypted layers reserved for disasters that were never meant to be seen from the outside. Stock exchanges suspended in silence. Universities closed without announcement. Freight ports locked down without explanation. The movement of billions appeared, from the outside, to have simply stopped. From the inside, nothing stopped at all. Every factory that could pour metal did so. Every line that could be refitted was. Machine tolerances were tightened beyond peacetime safety margins. Old patents were pulled from sealed archives and cleared for immediate fabrication. Nuclear furnaces that had been mothballed for a century were ignited without press releases or public votes. The conversion was not dramatic. It was administrative. The military did not mobilize in parades or visible formations. It evaporated into deeper layers of infrastructure. Personnel reassigned without leave announcements. Reserve lists activated without alarms. Underground training facilities, dismissed for decades as relics of paranoia, unlocked and filled within days. The human war machine did not wake up loudly. It simply stopped pretending it was asleep. Across alien space, sensor nets noted small anomalies and dismissed them. Human deep space mining platforms blinked off one by one, written off as corporate bankruptcies. Peripheral shipyards registered as abandoned and were dropped from trade indexes. No one understood that these places had not closed. They had simply stopped asking permission to exist. Diplomats attempted to provoke engagement. They issued public demands for clarification, then warnings, then performative concern. Humanity returned none of it. The absence of response became its own kind of message, but one that most species were too accustomed to fear to recognize as threat. Only the oldest powers, those that remembered how silence had once preceded extinction events, began to quietly adjust their projections. On the ruined colony, reconstruction advanced under sealed skies. Survivors were dispersed across closed systems with no public arrival logs. Aid ships flew without flags. Medical corps rotated without badges. No grieving footage leaked to galactic feeds. The Empire had intended the bombing to be a spectacle. Humanity denied them even that. The dead were honored in private where no enemy could measure the depth of what had been taken. Weeks stretched into the illusion of resolution. The Empire demobilized the strike fleet that had carried out the attack, confident the lesson had landed. Admirals began lobbying for new campaigns. Ship commanders rotated into training roles. War planners archived projections and shifted attention elsewhere. They could not see the ledgers forming beneath the blackout, only the comforting narrative that resistance had been burned out. Then the outdated transmission slipped across forgotten relays and brushed against listening posts that no younger civilization remembered existed. It carried no emotion, no plea, no threat. Only synchronized timing markers, mass displacement windows, and a single line of plain human language appended at the end, stripped of punctuation and ceremony. The few who could read it stopped speaking after they did. Still, to the wider galaxy, nothing appeared to change. No fleets emerged. No declarations were issued. No vengeance was promised. The Empire enjoyed its calm and mistook it for safety. What it could not see was that humanity was no longer preparing to survive what had happened. It was calculating the exact cost of making sure nothing like it could ever happen again. The first reply did not roar across borders or arrive with banners. It arrived as absence. One Imperial shipyard anchored above a gas giant failed to check in at shift change. 12 minutes later every dock, tug, fuel ring, and dry cradle was simply gone without explosion, debris, or echo. Traffic control assumed system error until the gravity map updated and showed missing mass where 1 trillion tons of infrastructure had been. Patrol craft jumped in blind and found empty orbit. The yard's workforce, the fleet it served, and its commanders were erased together in a single calculation now confirmed. The Empire announced a containment accident, blamed a reactor cascade, and sealed the system with quarantine buoys. Then a logistics hub 3 sectors away vanished during a refueling cycle. Then a fleet tender disappeared while tethered to a capital cruiser. The pattern bloomed faster than explanations could be manufactured publicly. Sensor officers flagged impossible readings and were ordered to recalibrate. When recalibration produced the same impossibility, they were ordered replaced. New crews returned the same data. Nothing exploded. Nothing warped. Matter exited the equation without drama, as if subtraction itself had been weaponized by hands that never appeared on scope. Within one rotation, 5 supply arteries collapsed and 2 reserve fleets stopped answering hails. Imperial Command accused sabotage, then internal treason, then experimental failure. Arrests followed. Interrogations followed. Confessions were demanded. None of it restored what had vanished or slowed the rate at which it continued to vanish across theaters. Human fleets were still not visible. No jump flares. No burn signatures. No energy plumes. The Empire searched for an enemy that insisted on remaining absent. It was warfare conducted through receipts and ledgers, where assets ended not in fire but in irreversible accounting loss that no heroics could reverse. Panic crept upward through ranks as admirals watched readiness charts decay without engagement. Entire task groups were rendered theoretical overnight. Fuel that no longer existed could not be burned. Ammunition that no longer existed could not be fired. The Empire still possessed ships, but they were being hollowed without impact. The first captured data fragment arrived from a drifting recorder found in empty orbit. It showed folded vectors where space should have been continuous, corridors that existed for less than an instant and left nothing behind. Imperial scientists argued over physics while their inventory continued to fall through reality itself. The Empire finally admitted attack. Emergency beacons were lit across inner systems, calling allies to muster. Few answered. Some were already discovering their own missing depots. Others were watching ancient probability models break in ways reserved for extinction arcs. Fear spread faster than orders ever could through every command level. When the human transmission was finally decrypted by Imperial cryptographers, it offered neither threats nor justification. It simply repeated the timestamp of the original bombing and listed losses on both sides in identical format. After the numbers came a single appended line that reframed the arithmetic with unsettling human clarity. The line stated that the destruction so far represented interest, not principle. It clarified that retaliation was not being executed in anger but in sequence. Each vanished facility, each erased fleet, was categorized as a payment step toward a balance that would not be negotiated down under any imaginable terms. Imperial morale fractured when commanders understood there would be no decisive battle to rally around. There would be no chance to strike back at a visible foe. The war was unfolding as subtraction, and subtraction favored the one who kept perfect records and infinite patience while the other only guessed. For the first time since the bombing, the Empire stopped boasting and started counting. Every hour brought another deficit it could not trace to engagement or sabotage. Somewhere beyond detection, humanity was replying in ledger entries and vanished megatons, transforming outrage into an audit that would be delivered in full. The message reached the galaxy without ceremony, slipping into every open relay, every civilian feed, every military band at the same synchronized instant. No anthem preceded it. No emblem accompanied it. Just a single human voice, steady, neither raised nor softened by grief. It replayed the bombing in perfect clarity from multiple civilian angles, unedited, uncompressed, shown exactly as it happened. When the footage ended, the voice returned and identified each vanished shipyard, each erased convoy, each missing fleet by designation and tonnage. The list matched Imperial losses down to the last digit. Then the voice explained that this was not vengeance. It was accounting. The strike on the colony had created a deficit. Humanity was now servicing that deficit in calculated installments. The galaxy waited for rage. None came. The voice stated that human doctrine no longer permitted symbolic wars, drawn-out sieges, or honorable stalemates. Those methods wasted time and produced survivors who misinterpreted mercy as weakness. The current response model sought only irreversible denial of future aggression. What had already been removed from the Empire's inventory represented the minimum necessary measures to begin enforcement. The message confirmed what Imperial intelligence had begun to suspect but refused to publicly name. Human fleets were operating within transit folds that collapsed before detection could resolve them. Engagement distance had been reduced to zero without spatial contact. Retaliation windows did not exist because access itself was the weapon. The Empire's defenses were not being outmaneuvered. They were being made irrelevant. The voice then recited a second list. Worlds scheduled for economic isolation. Fleets scheduled for permanent immobilization. Command hubs scheduled for removal from strategic relevance. Each target was announced without insult or emphasis, delivered with the tone of a scheduler confirming maintenance operations. The absence of emotion unsettled the galaxy more deeply than any threat ever had. Only after the list did the voice address the Empire directly. It stated that the initial bombing had been designated a warning shot by Imperial doctrine. Humanity had reviewed that doctrine and accepted the classification in spirit. The acts already executed were the equivalent of a human warning shot. The actual response had not yet begun. Across Allied space, emergency councils erupted into fractured debate. Some powers ordered immediate retreats. Others attempted to summon ancient defensive compacts that had not been invoked in millennia. A few, the oldest among them, transmitted a single-word acknowledgement and powered down their border lances without public explanation. The Empire's response was frantic and noisy. It flooded channels with ceasefire proposals, denials of intent, reinterpretations of the original attack as tragic misunderstanding. It accused rogue admirals. It cited corrupted intelligence. It offered reparations before being asked. Each transmission was answered only by another disappearance within its military registry. Trade guilds collapsed overnight as risk projections spiked beyond insurable limits. Capital fled systems once considered untouchable. Refugee convoys formed from species that had never imagined they would need them. The Empire's allies began withdrawing without coordinating exits, their confidence evaporating along with the illusion that anyone could remain neutral once the accounting had begun. Then the human voice returned for the second time. It corrected one Imperial statement regarding proportionality. The correction clarified that proportionality had been rejected after the colony was selected specifically because it lacked defensive value. That choice had transformed the exchange from conflict into demonstration. Humanity had accepted the demonstration and escalated it into systemic enforcement as permitted under its own survival statutes. The voice concluded by stating that diplomacy would resume only after the Empire's ability to project force outside its home cluster had been reduced to historical record. Until then, every vanished asset should be interpreted not as a message, but as a phase transition. Communication would continue through results. The transmission ended without closing remarks. No slogan was offered. No demand was issued. Yet across the galaxy, war doctrines were rewritten within hours. Humanity was no longer discussed as a regional actor or rising power. It was recorded in strategic annals as a species that did not threaten escalation. It simply enforced conclusions. The perimeter of the Imperial home cluster filled with objects that refused classification. Sensors returned mass without profile, thrust without exhaust, presence without approach. Defensive grids powered up across 1,000 worlds and locked onto nothing at all. Fleets formed layered shells and waited for targeting solutions that never arrived. Engines idled. Crews held breath. Then every warship in forward posture lost propulsion in the same instant. No surge, no battle damage, just silence inside the machinery. Auxiliary systems followed. Weapons drooped inert. The cluster did not fall in fire. It fell in quiet. The Empire still possessed ships, but ownership had been converted into paperweight by an unseen hand that did not ask for permission. Across the lattice of orbitals, command lights dimmed in synchronized compliance without appeal. The Emperor transmitted surrender within minutes, voice fractured by systems that would not obey. Humanity did not answer immediately. Instead, the inventories updated again. Orbital lances powered down. Missile stacks sealed. Fabricators idle-locked. The weapons were not destroyed. They were denied context. The galaxy watched capability decay without spectacle. Allies peeled away from the Empire and calculated corrections, announcing neutrality with the speed of evacuation. Civil administrators on human worlds prepared relief shipments without banners or triumph. Reparations were assessed not in currency but in labor, materials, and time. The ledger moved from subtraction to repair with the same clinical precision that had guided the removals. No cheers followed the capitulation. Only confirmations. Across comms, the phrase compliance acknowledged repeated until its meaning hollowed into routine without ceremony or pause. The Empire's final plea arrived after the terms were already implemented. It requested survival with dignity. The reply granted survival without qualifiers. Borders were reduced to administrative lines. Shipyards were converted to civilian output under supervised schedules. Officer corps were retired en masse into monitored anonymity. The apparatus that had taught itself to bomb warning shots out of children learned, abruptly, how small it was without leverage. Across distant systems, younger powers updated columns in quiet terror and relief. They learned the same rule at different speeds. Provocation had become a measurable liability, not a test of will. War had become an accounting exercise, and humanity kept impeccable books. Those who misread restraint as weakness rewrote doctrine with trembling hands and sterilized margins where ambition once scrawled conquest plans eagerly. On the shattered colony, the first unrestricted sky returned months later without announcement. Atmospheric processors breathed steady blue again. Families rebuilt in grids that favored shelter over grandeur. There were no monuments tall enough to satisfy what had been lost. Names were carried instead in ordinary speech, threaded through daily routines as living ballast. Children learned the story without spectacle and without hatred drilled into them. They learned that the difference between rage and resolve was record-keeping. They learned that power was loud until it mattered, and then it was exact. The lesson spread without speeches, migrating through education and industry as a cultural update that required no ceremony to install. Humanity did not grow gentler or crueler. It grew precise, and precision proved contagious across supply chains and doctrines. The final record in the ledger closed with neither flourish nor threat. It logged compliance achieved and risk reduced below recurrence thresholds. The galaxy recalibrated around that line. Traders returned with amended insurance tables. Border generals studied empty margins where bravado had once been safe. New conflicts still ignited elsewhere, smaller and messier, but never again in the way the Empire had tried. Humanity did not chase worship or extract titles from the fear it had authored. It accepted the quieter dividend of deterrence that required no celebration to maintain. When later generations asked what happened after the bomb, the simplest answer endured: "You tried to teach us a lesson, and we finished the syllabus." From that day forward, the galaxy measured strength not by fire, but by restraint irreversible.